Jericho Blackwell was never supposed to be an athlete. In the year 2157, humans had been competing in the Intergalactic Sporting Coalition for nearly 3 decades, and they hadn't won a single medal. How could they? The Draxians had 6 arms and reflexes 10 times faster than humans. The Krell could manipulate their bone density at will. The Vosandi essentially defied gravity. "We don't stand a chance," muttered Commissioner Hayes as he paced the observation deck, watching Earth's latest batch of Olympic-level athletes getting absolutely demolished in the training simulations. "We're too slow, too weak, too human." Jericho, who was only there because he'd been hired to clean up a legal mess involving importation rights for alien nutrition supplements, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, sir, you're looking at this all wrong." Hayes glared at the gangly, bespectacled man. At 32, Jericho was a failed law student who'd pivoted to becoming the most annoying paralegal at Transnational Legal Partners. He had exactly 0 athletic accomplishments and was primarily known for finding ways to weasel out of parking tickets. "And what would you know about intergalactic athletics, Blackwell?" Jericho pushed his glasses up his nose and held up the massive rule book he'd been studying. "I know that according to the Splorch competition rules, there's nothing that says a contestant can't use a magnetic field disruptor to counter an opponent's natural electromagnetic sensing abilities." Hayes blinked. "What?" "And in the Trilaxian speed tunnels, there's no specific prohibition against using sound frequencies that disorient species with tympanic membranes on their extremities." The commissioner stared at Jericho, who was now flipping through the massive rule book with increasing excitement. "Oh, and this is brilliant. The definition of natural physiology in section 47.9 is so poorly written that we could argue specialized training tools are extensions of human capability rather than technological enhancements." "Are you suggesting," Hayes leaned forward, lowering his voice, "that we cheat?" Jericho looked offended. "Absolutely not. I'm suggesting we play exactly by their rules, just not how they intended them to be played." His eyes gleamed. "Commissioner, these aliens wrote these rulebooks assuming all participants would approach competition the same way they do. But humans have a unique skill, finding the gap between what's written and what's meant." Hayes studied Jericho for a long moment. "You think you could train our athletes to exploit loopholes?" "Better." Jericho grinned, placing the rule book on the table with a thud. "I think you should stop sending athletes and start sending rules lawyers. And I know exactly where to begin." 3 weeks later, the first ever human regulatory exploitation team was assembled. They weren't the strongest, fastest, or most agile humans on Earth, but they were the most argumentative, pedantic, and technically correct individuals ever gathered in one place. And their first competition was only days away. "You realize the Kvornaks are going to literally eat us alive in the Gravitational Gauntlet," muttered Daphne Wu, a former contract negotiator who had once found 14 different ways to interpret a single comma. "No," said Jericho, smiling as he distributed custom-made gravity boots that perfectly exploited the loose definition of personal attire in the handbook. "They're not. Because we're about to teach the galaxy that humanity's greatest strength isn't in our muscles." He tapped his temple. "It's in finding the words they never thought to include." The Kvornak Stadium on Proxima Centauri B was a marvel of engineering, a massive, translucent dome where artificial gravity could be manipulated in real time. The Gravitational Gauntlet was considered one of the most physically demanding events in the Intergalactic Sporting Coalition, and no human had ever placed higher than 47th. "Remember," Jericho whispered as the human regulatory exploitation team prepared in their staging area, "we're not here to outperform them. We're here to outinterpret them." The team consisted of 5 members: Jericho, Daphne Wu, the contract negotiator, Marcus Okafor, a tax attorney who specialized in finding deductions no one else could, Imani Washington, a former debate champion who once argued that technically, a sandwich could be classified as a salad, and Lee Patel, who had made a fortune finding loopholes in online game economies. "I still think we're going to die," Marcus muttered, eyeing the massive Qornax warriors through the staging area window. The 8-foot-tall avian humanoids were covered in metallic blue feathers and had bone density 5 times that of humans. "Exactly why I added that health waiver codex to our registration," Daphne replied, adjusting the gravity boots Jericho had designed. Section 12.4 of the medical protocols clearly states that any permanent disability resulting from competition requires the providing of equivalent replacement biotechnology at the expense of the host species. "So if we lose our legs," Lee began. "We get fancy alien robot legs," Daphne finished with a smirk. A booming voice echoed through the stadium. "Next competition, Gravitational Gauntlet. Earth representatives to the starting position." The 5 humans walked up to a mixture of pity and amusement from the spectating aliens. The course before them was a nightmare, platforms at various heights with gravity that shifted unpredictably from near zero to crush your bones intensity. Competitors had to retrieve 7 tokens scattered throughout the course, with the fastest time winning. The Qornax champion, Razik, eyed the humans with his sharp golden eyes. "Your species' persistence is admirable, if foolish," he said through his translator. "Maybe this year you'll finish the course before the time limit expires." "Oh, we intend to do more than finish," Jericho replied pleasantly. "By the way, your translator is using an outdated dialect matrix. You might want to upgrade before the diplomatic reception." Razik bristled his metallic feathers in confusion as the humans took their positions. When the signal blared, the Qornax athletes launched themselves with practiced precision, using their powerful legs to propel themselves through the varying gravity fields, their wings adjusting to the shifts with natural ease. The human team, however, did something unexpected. Instead of charging forward, they split up. "Begin protocol pedantry," Jericho said into his comms unit. Lee immediately approached the nearest official, a gelatinous Morbulian with tentacle-like appendages holding a rule book. "Excuse me, but I'd like clarification on Rule 78.3 regarding the collection requirement." While the official was distracted by Lee's increasingly complex questions, Imani approached the course boundary and pulled out a measuring device. "What is the human doing?" asked a confused spectator. What Imani had noticed, and what no one had ever challenged, was that the rule defining the course boundaries specifically referred to the lower perimeter of the competition arena. It never specified that competitors couldn't go under the platforms. Meanwhile, Marcus stood before a gravity control panel that was visible to competitors but traditionally off-limits. According to Appendix F, Paragraph 11, competitors are prohibited from manipulating the gravity controls. However, the definition of manipulation specifically refers to physical contact resulting in altered settings. He pulled out a small device and aimed it at the panel. This remote scanner merely reads the upcoming gravity sequences without changing them, technically not manipulation. As the Qornax athletes soared through the course using brute strength and natural ability, the humans employed a completely different strategy. With Marcus feeding them the gravity sequence data, Daphne and Jericho took a route beneath the platforms where the gravity shifts were less severe. "This is outrageous!" screamed the Qornax coach as he realized what was happening. "Officials, stop them!" The head judge, a Phylaxian with 17 eyes, frantically consulted the rulebook. They aren't breaking any explicit rules. The course boundaries are defined as the lower perimeter, and they haven't crossed that line. And regarding the gravity sequence, added another official, they are not manipulating the controls, merely observing them from a distance. By the time the Qornax had recovered from their shock, Jericho and Daphne had collected all 7 tokens by taking the unconventional route below the platforms, avoiding the most punishing gravity shifts entirely. They crossed the finish line a full 40 seconds before Razik. The stadium fell silent, then erupted in a mixture of outrage and confused cheering. "Humans finish first," announced the automated scoring system, which cared nothing for tradition and everything for technical compliance. As the human team gathered at the finish line, Razik landed before them, his feathers bristling with anger. You did not compete with honor. You did not test your physical prowess against the challenges as intended. Jericho smiled pleasantly. We competed exactly according to the written rules. If you intended something different, perhaps the rules should reflect that intention. Commissioner Hayes, watching from Earth via transmission, laughed until tears streamed down his face. They're going to hate us, he whispered to his assistant. But they're also going to have to respect us. As the awards ceremony concluded and Earth received its first ever gold medal in an intergalactic sporting event, the Coalition representatives were already gathering for an emergency meeting to discuss rule clarifications. They'll close all our loopholes for the next event, Daphne said as they returned to their quarters. Jericho nodded, already flipping through the rulebook for the next competition, the Psychic Pentathlon. Of course they will. And that's when we'll use our greatest advantage. Which is? Asked Imani. Humans have been trying to outsmart each other with rules for thousands of years, Jericho replied with a grin. We don't just find loopholes, we anticipate how others will try to close them. And in that narrow space between the closing of old loopholes and the writing of new rules. He tapped a page in the rulebook with satisfaction. That's where we'll find our next victory. They've changed everything, Imani groaned, scrolling through the newly revised rulebook that had been delivered to their quarters just 12 hours before the Psychic Pentathlon. Every single loophole we found in the Gravitational Gauntlet has been patched with extreme prejudice. Jericho didn't seem concerned as he sipped his coffee. Of course they did. They're learning. The human regulatory exploitation team had become overnight celebrities across Earth. Videos of their unconventional victory had gone viral, with humans everywhere delighting in seeing their species finally find a way to compete in a galactic arena. Hashtag rules lawyers and hashtag loophole champions were trending on every social platform. They were considerably less popular among the alien competitors. The Medusan delegation has filed a formal protest, Lee informed the group, looking up from his tablet. They're saying we've violated the spirit of competition. Show me where spirit is defined in the rulebook, Marcus replied with a smirk. Daphne, however, looked genuinely concerned as she studied the Psychic Pentathlon guidelines. This is going to be a problem. The events are all based on telepathic abilities, thought projection, memory scanning, emotional resonance, psychic defense, and something called conceptual manifestation. Humans have zero natural telepathic capabilities. Which is exactly why we're going to win, Jericho said, standing up dramatically. When everyone stared at him in confusion, he smiled. What's the first rule of law? Never ask a question you don't know the answer to. Offered Marcus. Define your terms, Jericho corrected, holding up the rulebook. And the Coalition's definition of telepathy is where we're going to make history. The cerebral arena on Europa Station was a stark contrast to the physical intensity of the Gravitational Gauntlet. Competitors sat in meditation pods arranged in a circle, with holographic displays showing abstract representations of their mental activities. The crowd was smaller but more elite, telepathic species considered this event the true test of evolutionary advancement. The favorite competitors were the Medusans, whose entire civilization was built on telepathic communication, and the Ylzari, mysterious beings of pure energy who experience thought as their primary dimension. Humans competing in the Psychic Pentathlon? A Medusan commentator's thoughts were broadcast through the arena's translation system. They might as well send fish to compete in mountain climbing. As the human team took their positions, they wore what appeared to be simple headbands. These devices had been hastily assembled following Jericho's discovery and brought through customs under the classification of cultural ceremonial attire, another beautifully vague category in the registration guidelines. The first event was thought projection. Competitors needed to transmit a specific image to the judges. When it was Daphne's turn, she sat calmly in her pod, the headband glowing softly. The judges' displays remained blank for several seconds, then suddenly filled with a perfect rendering of the target image, a binary star system with precise astronomical details. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the audience. "Impossible," hissed the Medusan competitor. "Humans have no telepathic abilities." The second event, memory scanning, required competitors to access specific information from a volunteer's mind. We performed flawlessly, retrieving the target memory with unprecedented precision. By the third event, emotional resonance, officials were hovering near the human team, scanning equipment in hand. "Is there a problem?" Imani asked innocently as she prepared for her turn. "We are verifying compliance," said the chief judge, a YL-Zari whose energy form flickered with suspicion. "Of course," Imani replied. "We welcome any scrutiny that adheres to Section 47.6 of the competition protocols regarding mid-event evaluations." The officials huddled together, conferring urgently. The human team's performance was inexplicable, but their equipment detected no violations. Before the fourth event began, the Medusan delegation formally challenged the humans' participation. "These creatures have no natural telepathic abilities." Their representative projected forcefully. "They must be using prohibited technology." A hearing was convened on the spot. The human team sat calmly as accusations flew. Finally, Jericho stood to address the coalition officials. "The rules define telepathy as, and I quote, the transmission and reception of information through non-physical means." He gestured to their headbands. "These devices use quantum entanglement to transmit information without physical signals passing between them. By your very definition, this is telepathy." "But it's artificial," protested the Medusan representative. "Nowhere in the rules does it specify that telepathic abilities must be biological in origin," Marcus added, pulling up the relevant section. "In fact, the rules explicitly state that competitors may use their species' natural methods of telepathic communication. For humans, technology is our natural method of communication beyond our physical limitations." The officials were stunned into silence. Furthermore, Daphne continued, Section 12.3 states that accommodations shall be made for species with different sensory apparatuses. Our different sensory apparatus is that we've externalized our telepathic functions through technology, just as we've externalized flight through aircraft and underwater breathing through scuba gear. The chief judge's energy form pulsed with what appeared to be resignation. "The human's argument is technically valid according to our current regulations. The competition will continue." The final two events proceeded with the humans performing at levels that matched or exceeded even the most accomplished telepathic species. Their quantum entanglement devices, which Earth scientists had been developing for decades but had only recently miniaturized, allowed for transmission of information that was, by the Coalition's own definition, telepathic. When the final scores were tallied, the human team had secured another shocking victory. As they left the arena amid a storm of alien outrage and human celebration broadcasting from Earth, Commissioner Hayes contacted them with news. "The Coalition Council has called an emergency session," he informed them, his expression a mixture of amusement and concern. "They're rewriting the entire rulebook for all future competitions. They're bringing in experts from 17 species to close every conceivable loophole." "Perfect," Jericho replied, surprising everyone. "That's exactly what we wanted." "You wanted them to make it harder for us to find loopholes?" Imani asked incredulously. Jericho's eyes gleamed with mischief. "They think they're changing the rules to stop us, but what they're really doing is acknowledging that we belong in this competition. They're evolving because of us, and will evolve because of them. That's the real competition, not physical or psychic abilities, but adaptability." He held up his tablet, which displayed their next event, the Temporal Trials, a competition involving perception and manipulation of time itself. "Besides," he added with a grin, "the more complex they make the rules, the more loopholes they create," finished the team in unison. As news of their second victory spread throughout Earth, applications to join the Human Regulatory Exploitation Team flooded in from lawyers, debate champions, gamers, and rule breakers of all kinds. What had started as a desperate attempt to avoid embarrassment in galactic sports was becoming humanity's most valuable evolutionary advantage. The universe had created the rules. Humans were about to rewrite them. 3 years and 27 competitions later, the Human Regulatory Exploitation Team stood on the central platform of the Galactic Coalition's Great Assembly. Their journey had transformed intergalactic sports forever. The temporal trials had been their most controversial victory yet. By exploiting the definition of subjective time perception and deploying specialized neural interfaces, they'd managed to experience the competition's time-dilated challenges at a fraction of the perceived duration that other species endured. After that came the quantum quartet, where they'd argued successfully that the probability wave functions should be calculated from multiple reference frames simultaneously. Then the elemental endurance, where they'd redefine natural resistance to include protective equipment as extensions of human evolutionary ingenuity. With each victory, the coalition rewrote their rules. With each rewrite, humans found new interpretations. What began as outrage from other species had gradually transformed into reluctant respect, then genuine curiosity, and finally, admiration. The Kvornaks had even started sending their youngest warriors to Earth universities to study human interpretive thinking. Today, the coalition had summoned all competitors for a historic announcement. For millennia, the Intergalactic Sporting Coalition has celebrated the diverse evolutionary advantages of sentient species across our galaxy, began High Chancellor Vextora, their crystalline form refracting light in complex patterns. We measured worth through natural abilities, strength, speed, psychic power, temporal perception. The Chancellor's crystal facets glowed more intensely. The humans have taught us that we were measuring too narrowly. Jericho glanced at his team, now expanded to 15 members, with Daphne serving as Earth's first galactic sports ambassador. They come so far from being the galaxy's laughingstock. Today, we announce the restructuring of all coalition competitions, continued Vextora. No longer will we separate events by physical domains, but instead by problem-solving methodologies. Direct force, sensory adaptation, and, the Chancellor's lights pulse toward the human delegation, regulatory innovation. Gasps and murmurs filled the assembly. The humans approached a competition, finding pathways within established parameters rather than overwhelming obstacles through raw capability, represents a unique evolutionary strategy. One that deserves recognition as its own category of excellence. The announcement continued, detailing how future games would include dedicated events for creatures of all capabilities, including those whose strength was finding the gap between what was written and what was meant. As the delegation returned to Earth, crowds lined the streets, cheering the team that had transformed humanity's place in the galaxy. "You know what's funny?" Jericho said to Daphne as they waved to the crowd. "We spent all this time trying to convince them we belonged in their competitions. And instead, they created a whole new category for us," she finished with a smile. Later that evening, as celebrations continued around the world, Commissioner Hayes raised a toast at the team's reception. To the Human Regulatory Exploitation Team, who taught the galaxy that sometimes the greatest power isn't breaking the rules. Jericho finished the toast with a grin, "It's reading them more carefully than anyone else." On screens throughout Earth, the next generation of human competitors were already studying the newly revised rulebooks for the upcoming Galactic Games, their eyes gleaming with the same spark that had started it all, the uniquely human gift for finding possibility in the spaces between words.